Welcome to the Dean House. This house was built in 1856 by Nathaniel and Harriet Dean. Their pictures are on the wall up on the other room. And Harriet Dean was born in Wisconsin back in the 1820s, out in western Wisconsin. And her father brought the family to Madison because he was the finishing contractor on the first state capitol building. So they had been in Madison since the 1830s. Nathaniel Dean was born in Massachusetts, and he came west with his brother, and they were merchants in downtown Madison. They had a general store in downtown Madison. But in those days, a lot of the men wanted to own land because this was so special in the United States to be able to, for peasants or ordinary people to be able to own land. So he bought 500 acres out here, all the way from the lake to Highway 51, which wasn't there then, and from Buckeye Road to Flom Road, this whole 500-acre farm. They raised cows primarily, would have sold the milk into downtown Madison, but it was also a general farm because they had to support themselves living out here. So there would have been pigs and horses and gardens and so forth on a farm out here in the country. The Deans lived here for about 15 years. As I say, it was built in 1856. They had one child, a little boy who died as a child. He's buried at Forest Hill Cemetery, so there's no direct descendants. It's not Dean Milk and it's not Dean Medical. It's a whole other Dean family. So Mr. Dean and Mrs. Dean lived here, as I say, for about 15 years. Then he had owned a house in downtown Madison. There's pictures on the wall in the other room where the Park Motor Inn, the Inn on the Park Hotel is in downtown Madison. That was where their house was originally. But he sold that land to this group of businessmen who wanted to build the Park Hotel because they were thinking of moving the capital to Milwaukee because Milwaukee had better hotels. And so the businessmen in Madison said, no, we'll build you a hotel. So they did. They built the Park Hotel, and there's pictures on the wall there. Now they're refurbishing it, and they're going to go back to calling it the Park Hotel, apparently. So they moved into the Park Hotel when that got finished being built, and just rented the land and managed the farm, but didn't live out here. Mr. Dean died in 1880. She sold the farm, sold the furniture, sold the house, and moved to California. She is buried in California. She remarried, died about 1900, and is buried in California. He is buried, Mr. Dean is buried with his son at Forest Hill here in Madison. So then, it continued to be a farm owned by a couple of other people, but eventually a group of businessmen at Shanks Corners bought the land and turned it into a golf course in the 1920s. It's been a golf course since the 1920s, and they used this as the clubhouse for the golf course, and they just trashed it. They just did not take care of it. It was not heated in the winter. The plaster was falling down, the roof was leaking. So they were going to tear the house down in the early 70s when they built, or want to build, the new clubhouse. And that's when Historic Blooming Grove Historical Society got organized. One of the reasons was to save the Dean House. There were a couple of other farmhouses along Monona Drive that had been torn down for the businesses that were being built. And this group wanted to save an example of what this rural area used to look like. So since about the mid-70s, this Historic Blooming Grove Historical Society, Blooming Grove is a township, 6 miles on a side. There's a map on the wall in the dining room there. It includes the east side of Madison. It includes the city of Monona, but also all this land all the way out to Cottage Grove and all the way down to McFarland and all the way up to Milwaukee Street is the old historic township, 6 miles on a side of Blooming Grove. And that's why we call ourselves the Historic Blooming Grove Historical Society, because we're interested in the history of this whole 6 miles on a side area. So the house, the big dining room where the refreshments are, usually the table is set in the middle and set up as a dining room, because farm hands would probably come in off the farm at noon or at night to eat there. Then the parlor where the harps are was what we call the informal family parlor, where the family might have met after dinner, which was probably the midday meal, and in the evening and sit around and talk and read and play the organ. That organ over there does work. This is a melodeon on this side. Now it doesn't play. You can't make any sound, unless you pump it underneath. It's a pump piano called a melodeon. It's a different kind of instrument. We have a hair wreath here. People did crafts back then like we do crafts today. Women would brush their hair, save it, exchange it, especially white hair, blonde hair, red hair. You'd collect your friend's hair and wrap it around wires and add beads and things and make it into a wreath or a floral arrangement. We have stereopticon slides here with a stereopticon viewer, and you slide the bar back and forth and it'll make a three-dimensional picture. You're welcome to pick these up and look through them after the tour. We have a wonderful marble top table here that was given to us. So as I say, all the furniture throughout the house has just been given to us by people. We're trying to keep it in the Victorian style, about 1850 to 1910, but sometimes we stretch it a little, depending on what comes to us. And we certainly are interested in any real historical objects from the township of Blooming Grove also, even up to the present day. So now we'll go up the stairs. Now the curving staircase is original to the house, but we lost the railing. It wasn't there when we took over the house. We lease it for $1 a year from the city because it's still on the city golf course. So we just borrow it from them, maintain it, take care of it, heat it, light it, but it's still theirs. So we had to have new spindles made, we had a new railing made, and then the newel post came from a hotel in downtown Madison. It was being torn down at about the same time this was being fixed up. But the actual curve of the stair is original. So we have a very nice clothing collection. These are just a couple of examples. And a small doll collection, old-time biscuit.
So what would have been the year that these dresses
would
might have been worn?
Probably the 1880s, 1900, before the hems started rising in the teens, pre-World War I at least. So we call this the Heastan McKenna room. When Miss Heastan married Mr. McKenna, she was given this suite of furniture for a wedding present: the secretary, the dresser, and the bed. It's in an Eastlake style, these square ears on the corners, and also the design of the carving. We have a wonderful quilt collection, this gorgeous velvet crazy quilt, and then the wonderful orange and green and very tiny stitching. We think this might go back to about 1861. There's a little bit of embroidery and it's a little hard to tell exactly the date of it. We have a chamber pot because there wouldn't have been any bathrooms in this house, and so there's a washstand and the chamber pots, and there would have been an outhouse out back. And one of the objects that's newer is the stove in this corner. This house does not have any fireplaces. It's all heated with stoves. That would have been very modern at the time. Or there's a hole in the floor so the heat just rises up from the lower level. Is also a way to heat these upper rooms. But this stove here is an old gas stove with the gas flame at the bottom, and then the heat would rise up through those pipes and come out the top. But it was just so cute. And actually a man in Monona had worked at the company that used to make those kind of stoves, and he donated it. So as long as it has sort of a Monona, Blooming Grove connection and is cute, we will let it in. Let it in. So this we call the family bedroom. We have the double bed for the husband and wife. We have the hen and the rooster embroidered on the pillows. And this is called red work, when it's just red embroidery on white fabric, both the quilt and the pillowcases. A wonderful crocheted, hand-crocheted coverlet bedspread. As I say, the house was heated with stoves, so there's a stove here, although the stoves might have been placed differently, and it probably went out that chimney, but we put it over here. And so this is a pot for heating up water, and then the fancy decorative top can be moved back. And so you would bring the hot water over here to pour into the bowl and add some cold water to wash your face and hands, and then empty the dirty water into the slop jar there. And this is a real wash stand in the sense that it has this door for a slop jar underneath it, whereas the table on the other one I was just using as a table. And then over here on the dresser we have a nice collection of, what are these things?
hair crimping iron.
Yeah, hair curlers or crimping, making waves. And this one too makes waves. But of course there's no place to plug in. So what they did was they would light the lamp and the heat would rise up. And then there's this gizmo that holds your curling iron to get it hot. And someone said that they used newspaper as a tester so that if the newspaper burned, you didn't use it. It's too hot. You didn't use it on your hair. But we actually have two of them. So if you see one like this in an antique store, that's what they are. They're intended to sit over a lampshade to heat up your curling iron. Cool. Yes, I think that's quite special. We have a treadle sewing machine in the corner there behind the door, and the metal, what looks like a T-square on the wall is called a Picken square. And Miss Picken taught people how to make patterns before they made their clothes. And this was to give you the armhole curves and the curves that you find on a pattern. And then the booklets on the sewing machine tell you how to make patterns before you make your clothes out of the patterns. Yes, yes. The cradle for the new baby. And you're right, he was pointing out the shoehorn here and the button hook too for the old-time shoe buttons, and then the shoehorn you put back by your heel to slip in the shoes. Yeah. And then hairpins for people who have hair. And through this way, child's fainting couch in the corner there, children's bathtub and a practice ironing board, and the mattress has straw in it. And you've heard the expression, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. Well, the sleeping tight comes from the fact that you have to tighten up the ropes on the bed because it would sag after a while. And then the bed bugs might live in the straw mattress. And then the trundle bed underneath it, a pink quilt and a blue quilt for the boy and the girl. A little teaching machine here. You roll it and it'll tell you about plants and tell you about birds, and then you can practice drawing on the chalkboard sort of here. Behind is the school section with the desks one behind the other, and then the bulletin board has pictures of the what's called graded schools. This is one step up from the one-room schoolhouses, which would have been built in the 1850s. And then these buildings were built about 1900, 1910, because they would have had 4 rooms, first, second, third, fourth, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The more children as the farms grew and the kids moved in, they would have maybe 4 teachers and would teach. And now it's very popular to have second, third grade together again.
Now what school, is that Nichols or is
Nichols is the upper right.
It is, okay.
And that, of course, was always bigger from earlier on.
Okay.
But the other 4 are, 3 of the other 4 are still standing. Estes School just came down for that new grocery store out on Cottage Grove Road.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then the East Stand School out on Milwaukee Street is a daycare center, the upper left-hand corner, still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're fortunate even in this very urban area to have 3 of those schools at least still standing. The Wabisa School down on Sigilco Road, the one underneath the white paper sheet, is a resource center for children with autism. So it was a private house and became this sort of school. And then the Meyer School, the second one on the right, is a private house out near Cottage Grove in a rural setting out on Meyer Road. The map there on the wall with the red spots shows where they are.
All right. Well, my name is Gary Hess, and I'm the family historian, speaker, and author. And this is Ann Weidlich here. And this setup here is the Hess Cooperage. And this is my grandfather, right here, Frank J. Hess, Frank J. Hess, Frank J. Hess, Frank J. Hess. He was an immigrant from Bohemia. And starting at age 12, he traveled from where he was born west to Pilsen, Bohemia, where he served an apprenticeship to become a journeyman cooper. And then at age 20, he was the only sibling that immigrated to America, and he settled in Madison. and he manufactured white oak beer barrels for 62 years, becoming Wisconsin's largest independent cooperage. And this is a very special barrel. This is called a quarter barrel, and it holds 7.5 gallons of beer. And what's special about this barrel is it's signed by 4 surviving sons and my Aunt Josephine. My dad Joe was the oldest son, so he signed his name here, Joseph M. Hess, followed by his 3 brothers, my uncles, Tony, Foots, and Eddie, and my Aunt Josephine's name is here. And she was a manager, she signed her name here. Now when the Hess Coopers did close, this barrel was donated to the president of the Security State Bank, and it was there for many decades until 2008, when it was donated back to the Hess family. So this is on display every day of the year at the Dean House until for the acceptance when I go on a trip talking about the Hess Coopers. These are cattail leaves. So my grandfather learned during his apprenticeship that he needed to go to a marsh and harvest these cattail leaves, and he would get them out of the water. And this was the bottom part, and that was the top part there. Cattail leaves, but that's what this is. So he would take these back to his apprenticeship school, and he would put them up high somewhere where they would dry out. And then he would take these cattail leaves and he would install a leaf in wherever there's a wood joint, there and there and there, and on the top and on the bottom. And the mentality of using these is that when they get wet, they would swell, and that's what prevented the barrel from leaking. Ann's going to be talking about the cooling coil, and here it is right here.
Well, I was gonna, and actually it should go this way. The idea being that sometimes they didn't have refrigerators or ice houses big enough to store these beer barrels, so they could run cold water through the barrel, through these coils that were down into the beer to keep the beer cold or get the beer cold. The water would go in one and come out the other and coil around. And so these are called cooling coils. And they were actually set right down into the beer, because this would be the top of the beer barrel.
My grandfather designed these, and they were manufactured by a local aluminum contractor, but these were never found in a white oak barrel in the state of Wisconsin. And the reason they were not is because Wisconsin already had refrigeration. However, the breweries and the taverns on the East Coast, they were still set up to use these cooling coils, and so so the breweries would order up to 1,000 barrels, and it would take the Hess Cooperage 5 weeks to manufacture 1,000 barrels. Everyone got one of these cooling coils in them. We shipped them to the East Coast, and then they would fill them full of beer, ship them to the tavern, and they would pump cold water in them to keep the beer cold. And that's what they did on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Gary. And the other thing I want to point out especially in this room is this very plain-looking wooden box, but it has a mailing label carved into it. And it was used by an immigrant when he came from Germany to the northeast corner of Blooming Grove. And it's addressed to Karl Marx, and that's a very common German name. Madison, Stadt is city in German. Then it says Wisconsin, Nord, America, Blumen, Grove, Dane, County.
Wow.
In 1866.
Wow.
It's just so neat that you can still read it, although it's phonetic and he just knew where he was going but not how to spell it. And so this is probably our oldest and most precious object, even though it doesn't look like much. It really speaks to the immigrants coming and farming in this area. We have a typewriter collection. Those are getting to be antiques now. The display cases came from a jewelry store at St. Corners, and we have a display about the Security State Bank that is now the Monona State Bank. And this is a little history of that bank building in the display here. The wooden box over there is the ballot box for the Township of Blooming Grove, the town hall. There's a picture of the town hall right above it. And then the larger picture at the end, we had an airport down where Southtown is now. It was called the Royal Airport. And that's where Lindbergh flew in to Madison, was at that airport. And that road is the Broadway making the curve before it goes up onto the Beltline. And so it's the west end of Southtown is where those planes are parked. And there's a historical marker on the road. I mean, you have to go into the parking lot and come over to this west side, and the historical marker is along the road, but that's Broadway as it goes up. But yeah, there used to be an airport before the Dane County Regional Airport moved out onto Stoughton, before the airport moved out to Stoughton Road.
Interesting.
But this is a big farm butter churn and an egg collecting crate, and of course the spinning wheel. So here we have the kitchen, and then the oven is here, and this would have been the water for hot water, keeping the hot water ready, and that's an agitator for this is the washing machine. This is the washerwoman here washing up our cups. Thank you very much. So the pump, we're pumping the water. Over there.
Whoa, it's so functional.
Well, it comes from a bucket.
You had me going.
We don't think there was ever a cistern in this house. Many old houses would have, but there would have been a pump out in the backyard, but maybe not a pump in the kitchen, actually. It's the ice box. Our first ice box. Yep, an ice box. Was an ice box. You bet. I still call it an ice box. And so there's ice in the top. Come look at the.
That's the refrigerator.
So we have ice in the top, more or less,
It's not real.
and then food in the bottom, because the cold air would sink down and keep the food sort of cold. And then it would melt, the ice would melt into the pan, and you had to remember to empty the water out, or else it would overflow onto your kitchen floor. And, I remember. Right. Of course, they would have cut ice out of the lakes originally. Then Oscar Mayer, because we had Oscar Mayer in town, they made ice, mechanical ice, for their meat packing. And then it was such nice ice, the employees wanted to take it home, so they began to sell ice around town. And this card did what? What does this card do? At the Yes. How many pounds of ice did you want? You put this in the window. And whatever was up told the iceman. And it was a horse-drawn truck, yep. And you would just chunk off, with an ice pick, chop off a chunk.
And how long would it last? Like how
2
often?
or 3 days, maybe, depending on the weather. I mean, sometimes these were on the back porch, so that in the fall and spring and winter it would stay colder longer. But maybe they delivered 2 or 3 times a week, or 3 or 4 times a week in the summertime. And then there would be what was called ice famines, because there wasn't enough ice to go around. And you wouldn't get your delivery, maybe. And that was called an ice. The other name was Conklin ice. Conklin ice, that's right. They were the big ice. So this is the pantry that goes with the kitchen. And this we have our iron collection. And of course iron started out just being iron. And again, but then they invented these, which has a removable handle. So you could have 2 or 3 heating up on the stove, and then the wooden handle is cooler than the iron handle, and then it just pinches down onto it, and you could begin to iron. Now this one is a variation on that, in that the handle moves up and you can lift it off, and it's asbestos lined so that it keeps it cooler. And again, you have several of these on the stove, and then these buttons here fit into the holes, and then you can lift it up and iron. Now this one, you put the fire right in it.
Oh my
the hot
gosh.
coals right in it. And
It's heavy.
right, as you can tell.
Can I lift it?
Yes, you may. I mean, these things. You used to be able to earn a living being the laundress, the laundry lady. Well, you can see why. The skill it must have taken to iron, especially with starch, and white fabrics, and so you didn't burn, and it had to be just the right temperature, and the only way you could tell was to tap it, and it was a real skill if you were able to wash and iron Yes, and you could probably earn a fairly decent living doing that. This is a butter bowl, just a wonderful patina on this bowl, a burl bowl, and then the paddle to squeeze the water out of the butter, and the mold to make a nice pretty design on the butter. Is what those are. A bread rising pan. This is actually a bread mixing pan. It's a little bit newer. It has directions written right on top of it because it has a fork in it inside the pan, like they do, so that you could mix your bread and then put this on it and just leave it in there to rise. Okay. Sock stretchers, the wool socks, so that they didn't shrink. After you wash them, you'd stretch them over. And these things come in all different sizes and shapes for the different kinds of wool socks. I was at a home where she had a big collection of little baby ones and different sizes of wool sock stretchers. Candle making, butter, more small butter churn, foot warmer. This is a gorgeous piece. We usually have this on the dining room table, a wonderful canister set. And then the milk, again, this is a little more modern. The milk man would come, but the thing is that this doesn't make noise because it's all rubber coated bottle. The cream would rise to the top and collect in the bowl, and this is a special cream top spoon. And very carefully, you could put that down in there and then pour off the cream without the milk getting into, or you could just stir it up and then you'd have the milk, because otherwise it's skim milk at the bottom before it got homogenized. Now, but this is a special cream top bottle with a cream top spoon to pour off the cream. Thank you very, very much. Please have some refreshments and look around, wander around. Any see things, you're welcome. Yeah, you remember a lot.